Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this new episode of the Fundraising Insiders podcast, the podcast where we find out what's happening behind the check and we put it inside the deck. Today, we are actually with someone who is in the deck. You spend your entire life in the deck, but not just in the deck, you also spend a lot of your life in the labs. And we're going to talk about academia and startups. And of course, fundraising, because we have to. That's the whole idea, the whole essence of this show. I'm really glad to have you on, Tero. Your full name is Tero-Pekka. I hope I'm pronouncing it well with a Finnish accent. But I believe you said it was fine to go with either TP or Tero. So if you hear this, don't be confused. We're referring to the one and only and the same person. Tero, please introduce yourself. Who are you? How you got into what you're doing today? What's your background? Tell us all.
Yeah, hello, and thank you for the invitation to this podcast. My name is Tero-Pekka Alastalo. I'm originally from Finland, but living here in San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Avenue Biosciences, which is I would say, startup project that I've been working with my co-founders and of course rest of the team. And fascinated to today tell you a little bit more about that also. But yeah, my background is in medicine and I would say basic research. I'm a trained in the MD PhD. Did also some attempts to become really a clinician. So I actually specialized in pediatrics and pediatric cardiology, and also spent a lot of years in the lab. I have a PhD in molecular biology and did a lot of translational, I would say, basic research on certain cardiovascular diseases at Stanford for some years, and also had a chance to establish my own research group in University of Helsinki. So also been working as a principal investigator for some years, and so there's a kind of a long history already in the so-called academic and clinical setting, but also had the opportunity to kind of test my skills and expertise in the world of startups, which kind of happened 2012 when we co-founded an academic spin-out from University of Stanford University. That kind of changed my life in a way. So that took me into a pathway that was not originally my plan, but it has of course turned out to be a very exciting and rewarding journey in the world of life science startups.
I remember in our first conversation, you literally said it, you were not destined to be a founder. And somehow you got into it. I believe it started with a technology in sequencing that felt relevant to the patients that you were following when you were in that clinician phase. What was the clicking moment of, I'm researching a solution, now I want to make the solution available to the masses? So when did that scaling aspect happen? What made it click? And the follow-up question that I'm setting up here is, what made this click irreversible? Because although you went back to, we'll talk about it, all of your companies are academic spin-outs, but it clicked in a way, and every time you went back to the uni part, it span out again. And it feels like it's kind of always this back and forth. So why? Tell us more about this dynamic.
Yeah, so I never had any plans of becoming an entrepreneur. I had a very clear pathway of working in the academic and clinical setting, research and doing maybe some clinical stuff. That was my kind of career plan. And of course, I think my postdoctoral years at Stanford University changed, I would say, everything. Being in that kind of a very innovative environment, seeing a lot of technology spinning out and of course, the whole Silicon Valley atmosphere, it probably had some kind of effect but it didn't really affect that I want to be an entrepreneur, but it maybe kind of opened my eyes really in how to academic research and innovation can be really taken into the next phase and commercialized successfully. And I had a privilege of meeting my co-founder at Stanford, which was Samuel Myllykangas. He was working on some cancer biology and DNA sequencing kind of technologies. And when he started talking to me about his technology and how it can change the way we're sequencing DNA and analyzing it especially from diagnostic perspective, I got really excited about it because as I had the pediatrics background. So in pediatrics, if you're working in a university hospital, you're working a lot of these patients have certain kinds of genetic disorders and some kind of genetic origin of the diseases. So genetic testing, DNA analysis, understanding the mechanisms of diseases, I think it's a part of every pediatrician if you're working in a university hospital setting. And I got really fascinated about this technology and how it could speed up basically my own workflows with patients. And I think that's when we started talking with Samuel and then some other guys who joined the company. So we really started to I think I would say the first tests and why I was so motivated was the chance to actually build up tests that I can use with my own patients. And that was, I would say, the initiation for my entrepreneurship.
So you grew out the lab just organically in a way. It was very organic. You needed it, so you built it yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a very fruitful scenario for founding startups. Is that you're working when you have a certain problem and you kind of encounter a solution, and then you kind of consider this is actually a great chance to found. I see also sometimes founders that I want to be a founder, and now I'm actually looking for some problem that I could solve. I've never had that kind of a scenario. I rather encounter some kind of a problem and solution in let's say an academic setting, or there's scientists who are working on it, and then we start actually kind of working on the next phase of actually taking it into a commercial. But I think my journey was definitely an accident, more like there was happened to be this meeting the right people. There's a very interesting technology. It aligns with my own problem. And then I said, this could actually become a universal, I would say, problem solving, and we could actually create some business out of it.
It's interesting because you say it's an accident, yet the accident happened 3 times. And the scenario was sort of similar. So is it because you were terribly unluckily lucky having those 3 accidents that turn into founding a company? Or was it something that you consciously or not started to induce yourself? You were going towards the problem and the solution, and happened to have the first time you did it out of nothing, but the second time you had the experience and you knew how to spin it out. So do you think it was always accidental, or is there a blueprint? Is there a path, something that you repeated intentionally that led to this encountering a problem, finding the solution academically yet again, and then spinning out again? Was it all the same, or was it always accidental?
No, I think the first time it was more like the stars were aligned. It was almost kind of an accident. That was the way first. Like I never had the plan of doing it. Then we started working on it, and it took me, kind of changed my career pathway completely. And working with Blueprint Genetics for 8 years, and then after the acquisition in the new area, it of course gave me a kind of a new toolbox of skills, and also I got really fascinated with the idea of building actually on top of academic innovation, and really the whole commercialization and redefining the technology into some kind of a successful commercial process. I got, I think, very fascinated and almost maybe slightly even addicted to that whole process. Working with the team, small team, to really accomplish something like that became really kind of a fascinating problem to solve. And so first time it was more like an accident. I didn't really know where I'm actually going. It just felt like the right thing to do. And I would say after doing that for many years and seeing the kind of seeing that pathway from building something from scratch to being almost 200 people, and kind of having that kind of whole journey experience was, I think, very logical that I kind of have so far stayed in that same pathway. And I think the next startups and projects that have come to me have been more like opportunities that I know somebody who's working on an innovative technology, and either they've already spun it out, or then I was co-founding like Avenue Biosciences with an academic researcher. So I think it's a little bit different pathway, but I think the story is of course the same. Academic innovation, very fascinating to actually take that technology and start like working on the so-called commercialization process. And I think that's something that really motivates me.
It could sound uncommon because in the standard mind, you would think that spinning out something from a university is something that you can only do once. You do your studies, you do a PhD, you find something, you spin it out. And once it's done, you don't go back to university. Yet you did it 3 times. If I'm correct, that is because it wasn't always you being the researcher, but you were teaming up with researchers that had a specific novelty. Usually you hear this. We were very lucky a couple of weeks ago to have Maxim from Cambridge Future Tech, which is a structure in Cambridge that also spans out of Cambridge, where they go and see in the labs and they look for those innovations to do venture building out of it.
Yeah.
They do it as an organization. You did it as a solo person. Did you have a specific strategy to look for the right lab that had the right invention? Did you have like a deal flow of cool inventors or researchers and professors or research group that you were interested in? You kind of scouted them and did your due diligence for a couple of months, and then you decide to go with one or another. How was your approach? Was it very methodic like this, very systematic, or was it more just again, random encounters. Because as a founder, say, if any of our audience has already done their studies, they've already graduated, they're past the chance of spinning something that they did in their own research, they might think, well, that path is done for me. I fall in the new category, which is I need to look for a problem. How do you do this? How did you do it?
Yeah, I think for me, I think things have been more on the serendipity side. After I said there was a certain serendipity to meeting somebody like future co-founder in a coffee line at Stanford University and becoming kind of friends, and often having these long talks about his technology and the science and applications. Of course, that was the first process to initiate Blueprint. After that, I would say the next startup where we were working on cardiac digital biomarkers on a company called Cardiosignal, which was already founded when I joined there. It was a relatively early stage company. Of course, one of the co-founders was a friend of mine from medical school. So there were certain, I would say, again, it was kind of an accident that we encountered each other again at certain time, and I moved to that company to work on that side for a couple of years. Avenue Biosciences is a certain level of serendipity also there. I basically met my academic co-founder Ville Paavilainen many years ago. He was in UCSF a postdoc when I was in Stanford, and we met in some rock climbing situation outside and became friends. And we've been kind of sharing our pathways as years have gone, and he started talking to me about his technology, which I really kind of was very fascinated, as it's I would say a very hot technology. I would say, especially on how the medical development or therapy development is at the moment happening. So I got really fascinated about that. Of course, I could say there probably has been other potential opportunities come to my door, but there has to be a certain calling, and I would say excitement, something that I see really fascinating. But I never have really been looking systematically that I want to find new technology that I'm going to work on. It's more like being serendipity, somebody I somewhere know in my network, and suddenly the technology is there, and there's an opportunity to start working on it. So it's in that
Does
sense,
the opportunity...
there has never been really a plan. So things have just happened.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to you, but at some point you have to learn how to catch it. And how did you catch those? Because serendipity is nice. It's nice in the sense that it is there, it happens. That's one thing. It can come to you and leaves. But at some point, what you did that changed everything, and maybe others might think, oh, it will never happen to me or whatever. Maybe because they just didn't take the time to catch it. How did you catch it? Was it by saying, hey, I actually think we can do something out of this. Let me come in with my strategy, my experience, and let's try to build this out. How do you go from the opportunity coming to you and starting something, taking that step?
I think in these, I would say this Avenue Biosciences and also in the Cardiosignal, I think in both of these cases, these opportunities have come close to me, and I've got really excited about these technologies. I of course see a lot of startups out there, and I meet a lot of startup founders, and there now and then there's something that really excites me. And I think I said I was not searching for anything in a way, but this kind of I think it's like during the years you build a network of people, and when a lot of them are scientists and developers and inventors. I think there's no actual plan that I have. It's just happens to be one of my colleagues from the past has an exciting technology. We discuss about it. I've even been following this technology development for some years before we founded the company, because I knew one of the so-called academic developer of the platform. So I had been kind of immersed to the development of the technology, and we've been always talking about its commercialization. I think it's just a network of individuals who are doing scientific and academic research around you, and sometimes there is like just a perfect moment. You are available. You're actually you have the chance to actually start. You have the chance to jump on it. So I think it's I'm not sure if there's any kind of a direct recipe itself in it. It's just, I said, these have come to my doorstep in the right time, the right technology, and it's just been a natural, I would say.
I'm trying to find the factor in common that makes this happen, because luck is one thing, opportunities coming to you is yet another. But at every point, there are two things. You are curious, and you are actively cultivating that curiosity through the network. And that feels like it's the step number one. You can be curious, but if you're curious in your own corner, doesn't do anything. So
Mm.
getting out, meeting the people, keeping that network. You were saying that some of those technologies you were following for a moment, you were talking to those people about their innovation when it was in the lab and following the growth until you actually got business engaged. So keeping that live is the right thing to do. Now, let's talk about the learnings out of all this. So we talked about the why it happened and when it happened. Let's talk about how you transform something. Every time you span things from university, and that brings the question, because a lot of inventors invent from university, and there are a million things that can be scary. The number one that comes to mind, of course, is IP. It's, do I have the right to take this thing out of the uni lab? Is the uni going to track me to death? Because, oh, this happened in my lab and it belongs to me. So as a founder, what are the kind of, let's try to work the couple of rules that are consistent to spinning out from a university, the things that you should be careful about, the contracts you need to have in place. Then we'll talk about the regulatory aspect, because with bioscience in general and healthcare, it's yet another playing field. But coming out of the university, if say I am a young founder, I've never done anything that spins out of a university, and I'm worried, I'm a bit scared of, is the university going to take my IP? How do I get out of it? How do I retain my rights but not get into bad terms with the tech transfer office? What do I have to do? Can you tell me maybe the 3-5 things to really keep in mind every time you're doing a spin out from a university?
Yeah, that's there's a lot of I would say a lot of things to consider. Of course, when it comes to the IP, of course, different universities. I've only had maybe some experience in licensing technology from a U.S. University, and then some Europeans. So of course there can be quite dramatic differences
Of
in
course.
what the universities are looking for. So far, I have to say, in all of the 3 startups that I've been able to so far work, I have technically had a quite positive experience. So whether we've been licensing technology from Stanford University or University of Turku or University of Helsinki, I think in all of these scenarios, I think these licensing and negotiations with university have been, I would say, relatively good experiences. Let's say, I think I have seen, at least in Europe, in universities that we have been negotiating, the policies have now been changing more favorable for actually spinning out companies and really international, I would say, cap tables.
Okay.
So I have a feeling that there's a lot of horror stories, I think, from certain European universities, like taking 50% of the shares in the beginning, or 25% or stuff like that, which are, I would say, from a North American or investor perspective and also founder perspective, I would say it's a brutal strategy.
It can be a killer for
it
later
can be a
rounds.
killer. Yeah, it could be a killer. I wouldn't proceed with the startup if a university would be requiring those kind of things.
Your personal rule of thumb would be what? Anything between 5 and 15, maybe 20%? What is the kind of range
I think
we're talking here?
there are different ways to structure. I think the whole licensing deal has to be looked at quite widely. Are there royalties for future sales? Are there some other aspects in the contract? And I know some universities with biotech innovation, they are maybe favoring royalties rather than equity, and some universities are favoring equity rather than anything else. So it's always a negotiation. There are many things to negotiate. So you're looking for a package. I would say I tend to see that many of the universities are moving into more like 5 to 10% of the so-called equity. But like I said, it's the full package that you're negotiating.
Gotcha.
It's also what are the other terms, and are there some other restrictions?
And on that IP, exactly what you're talking here, the other terms, because equity is the one that comes on top of the mind, the IP ownership, most likely an exclusive license, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
But what are the other terms? I mean, the hidden terms that you would say, hey, be careful about this specific thing, or can you tell us maybe some of those hidden terms that were very crucial and that you realized maybe either too late or that you caught up early on, and thank God you caught up on it, because it could have killed the whole revenue
I think
model or
the
something
biggest
later on?
discussions, especially on the European side, have always been on the equity side and
Okay.
trying to negotiate an equity level that I would say will not shoot down the company in the first
company.
investor negotiation. So yeah, trying to build a healthy cap table.
Gotcha.
So I think that's been, I would say, one of the biggest negotiations is that. And I think as part of the exclusive license from university, of course, there are other things like milestone payments, royalties. Those have been relatively, I would say, simple simple to manage and negotiate. But I think the biggest pain
Okay.
point is the equity. I would say, and that's something that I think founders should really focus on negotiating and take time and bring expertise into the table. But it's very difficult to modify in the future if you negotiated the wrong equity deal with the university.
Let's close on the IP part very briefly. I was talking to a founder recently, and she was mentioning we are spinning something. So it's not a university; it's a research lab, but the conditions are roughly the same. And she's thinking, I have a bit of money. What do I do? Am I fine with the exclusive license right now? And I use my money to develop the company, or do I take my money and use it to buy the IP so that it fully belongs to us now, that it's not so expensive? When is the right time? Did you ever buy out the whole IP to be the company's property without having it, for example, owned by the university, but with an exclusive license? Does it ever come and bite you in the back later? When is it that you have to care about, is the IP yours versus the university's? And what kind of money are you set to how do you put an evaluation on this? Can you tell
Those
us a
are
bit more
very
about the
difficult
ownership?
questions. That's a very complex question. I've in one of the startups there has been a situation where IP has been purchased from the university, and it's basically now owned by one of the startups. So it's that has happened in a startup that I've been working on. So that kind of and it has been executed with, I think, a very favorable terms. So it has been something that was doable. But I think with many universities, I think it's even almost impossible to negotiate that, and it's very hard to put a price tag on it. Like, we have done some attempts on this, but it has become so complex that we've just decided to keep it like as a classical licensing setting. Because I think in the end, I would say, if you think about a startup and there's a certain exit scenario, it's still a routine in academic spin-outs that people have licensing contracts with universities. So I don't think it's a deal killer for I would say the success of the company. Of course, it's beneficial if you have the IP completely, but
why? Why is it so beneficial? Like, why one of the companies that you had actually sought to buy the full IP? Why is it so useful for some of the people listening? They might think, well, what's the difference between if you own it yourself versus the university owning it? Where does it become a problem?
I'm not
Why
sure.
do I need to care
Yeah,
about
I think
it?
it can be from technology to technology, and from business case to business case, there can be some scenarios. I think it depends on the licensing terms again. And I think if the licensing terms are really good, I don't think any buyer of your company will ever have any problems in
Gotcha.
doing that. And I think many universities also seem to be quite favorable that if you actually took the technology, you license it, and you further developed it into a success story, and now you have let's say, an acquisition scenario. Those are places where I think, in my experience, the people I've been negotiating, it's a possibility that in those kind of settings there is actually some IP transfer happening. So I think that's something that it's good
Right.
to also negotiate with universities, or at least have that kind of a dialogue with them. So I think it's a university's advantage, and of course the kind of company's advantage to also be, I would say, flexible in those scenarios, and maybe package some technology transfer in an exit scenario. But again, there are so many scenarios with different types of technologies that
Gotcha.
can really much affect, like, is the buyer really interested in having the IP to themselves or licensing it? Let's say you have a technology that somebody acquires and it's going to be packaged into it's very hard to measure maybe any royalty, I would say, value for the technology, because it's so integrated into some service. So technically, the royalties become like worthless then technically for the university. So there's a lot of maybe advantage to try to negotiate technology transfer. And
I see
just
what you mean.
basically get the advantage of the so-called equity deal that comes out of it, or the equity component.
So we've tackled the equity component, we've tackled IP, we've tackled royalties and other terms. Any other things to be really wary about when doing a uni spin-out? Thing you should either put in place early on,
Yeah.
people you should
Yeah.
have by your side. Tell us.
I think one of the things that I think from the equity side is critical, and I've seen non-successful stories in the past. Is always this so-called founder shares, because let's say academic spin-outs, there's a lot of like great research labs that are just constantly spinning out companies, and they have had a really good mechanism for that. And I think this is always that when you have academic innovators, there's always the question that how do you actually split the equity? Who are the founders? You might have academic founders, you might have like people who are operative founders. Often the academic founder is a person who is who's going to continue his research in the university, but he wants to found this technology. He wants to found a company with his I think this can be a very critical step here. How do you actually split the equity? And I think this is somewhere where I've seen some horror stories where there's a lot of people who kind of stay in the academia. You have massive shares on the company, and I think that's again a sick cap table. So you basically have this dead ownership, and people who are not taking so much risk are actually then having a very high. That's something that I'm very allergic to, in a way, and I think that can really destroy also the company to some extent. And I think this is like a critical step when you have an academic innovation, some kind of a principal investigator, great technology. You're starting to gather the team. Like, how are we going to found this and get this technology commercialized? I think it's a painful discussion, actually. How do we split the equity? There are people who want to kind of jump in full time and risk their careers, maybe other careers around this technology, and then there's like very important co-founders, like the academic people who want to stay in academia and help the company. And how do you split the equity? That's, I think, very critical. And that discussion has to be done as early as possible.
So your advice would be just discussing it. Are there any frameworks, maybe kind of rule of thumbs that you could advise founders that are potentially in this situation to do so that they could have a discussion with their co-founders? One that I had heard before is you put points on what you are going to do or the skills you have, and you kind of allocate points, like say a marketing is worth X points, technology is worth X points, and I do this, I do that, you do this, you do that. At the end, you make a list of the points, and the split of this becomes a split of the equity. Now, if there is also who's going to be full-time versus part-time, maybe you add a multiplier to the points at the end. I don't know. What are the kind of frameworks that you could recommend people to do within those discussions to help them decide on that?
Yeah, I think, again, every case is slightly different, but I think it's if you are an academic co-founder, you're not going to put your full life on it. You're basically de-risking your life by actually continuing your academic career or some other career. Are you part-time? Are you advisor? Whatever you're doing, you're not doing it in a full steam. You may have a huge contribution because you actually invented the technology. So of course, a very important person, a very important asset for us, from an advisor perspective. But if you're not jumping full-time into the company, this is basically a spin-out from your lab, but you're not going to like risk your rest of your life basically, or risk the next couple of years, like just putting everything in your possession. I think those kind of individuals are very important, but the equity that these kind of people should have should be, I would say, on the similar level, max what the university gets, max, right. I would say. So and the rest of the equity should be split with the operative founders, so that there are like people who commit, dedicate their life.
Risk.
Yeah, they take the biggest share, and I think that's like the fair strategy.
So understanding the risk taking as a multiplier, as a factor of the equity, right?
Yeah. I think this is something that I see a lot of like cases which I think are very risky. Like there are academic co-founders like with really big shares, and they are just pursuing their de-risking everything and I think that kind of creates that unhealthy cap table. At some point it hits on the face. Like there's equity that is a little bit, maybe I would say, unfair.
Before we talked about the 0 to 1, which is getting off the ground, getting out of the uni, starting the thing, getting the first paper in place, the IP, the terms, etc., the team. Before we jump into fundraising, which is usually what happens in step number 2, because once the uni is not necessarily paying for everything you do, you need some resources. And God knows science, and in particular, life sciences are very expensive. So we'll talk about funding a bit later. I want to switch to part 2 of the podcast. As you might be aware of, this is a bit more generic kind of questions. It's going to be very fast-paced. I ask you a list of questions, say in 1 or 2 minutes. You answer either option A or choice 1, choice 2. And don't worry if some of these feel a bit complicated and you want to answer, well, both. You can say both. It's not cheating. There's no rules. And if you don't know or if you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine as well. We'll discuss it right after the segment. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
All right, let's go. So, and we'll try to keep this in the mindset of an academic spin-out. Let's try to keep that as a filter. Grant first or VC money first?
I think in most cases, I would say grant money can be a first source of funding. I think with Avenue Biosciences, actually, the first money that we got was actually a kind of a grant money to kind of get things started. So I think it's a great way to
get it started.
these kind of companies. So maybe I say the grant money, but as I said, use cases can be so that the VC can become also very early. So we had VCs basically. We needed the VCs to become really fully operational. So it's but I think for some companies, I think the grant is a great additional, I would say, tool to kind of continue the academic side.
In your own experience, you prefer working with US investors or European investors?
I like working with both.
Scientific co-founder or commercial co-founder? What do you prefer having?
Commercial co-founder by my side. Yeah.
And so you would be the technical person in that case.
Commercializing an academic innovation is so difficult that I would say if I would have to kind of favor what kind of a co-founder I bring, I think a person who has previous commercial experience, especially in the biotech and life science space, I would say I very much appreciate that kind of an experience.
Okay.
I think we can definitely solve the academic and scientific side quite easily, but having that kind of strong founding team that has that kind of an experience, I think it has been something that I just see really beneficial.
I see.
If I had to choose, do I take a purely academic co-founder or somebody who has a commercial experience?
You'd go...
Even an academic spin-out, I would select the commercial experience.
All right. I see what you mean. Let's see. How do I say this one? If you were to restart a company tomorrow, would you do again a university spin-out, or would you try to do it from scratch this time?
I think even working with university spin-outs, it's a starting from scratch in many ways. But I think for me, I have this strong scientific and medical background, and I'm really hooked with the concept of working with academic innovations and have that long-term research, IP, innovation. Already there's a lot of effort that has been already put on the table. I find it really fascinating to work with those kind of, and especially in life science where you're trying to build maybe new therapies or new platforms that can boost therapies or new diagnostic settings. You almost need that academic research in the background to really have a solid story and a kind of a reason to really spin out a company. So in some sort you need some kind of a background. But I think it's always starting from a scratch. I hear this horror story sometimes, and I've heard it too many times, that people say that when the research is done well in the academic setting, 90% is done. That's a very dangerous, very, very dangerous.
No.
In many cases, we have to reinvent the technology, and the original academic setting is actually very far from a scalable commercial product. And then even finding the market fit and all that work is just enormous amount of work. You could even say that it's more work than actually original scientific innovation. With many cases, it can be like this.
Speaking of which, when you're pitching to an investor, are you putting the science first or the market first?
I would say market first, if I have to select.
Gotcha. Yeah. For an investor. We'll discuss this one later because I'm sure there's also a lot to develop here.
Yeah.
When reaching out to said investor, are you more of a one-pager or send a full presentation with many details?
I tend to use a short introduction deck.
Short deck.
Which I often power with a short video of going through the decks. They can actually look at the deck and listen to me actually speak the deck. So they get that speeds up sometimes the next meeting because they already have the whole idea. So we can go faster into a Q&A.
So this question, you could probably answer it in two different ways. Do you prefer exiting early and then restarting a new business, or do you prefer to go in the distance and keep the company, maybe go to IPO, etc.?
A dangerous question, but I would say I am. If I have to select from one of those, maybe the first version is maybe closer to maybe these kind of technologies that I've so far been working with. Gotcha. I may in the future have a startup company that will work on a technology and approach where the latter one is the right path. But I think. If I have to select again, I would say maybe the first path, first choice. Yeah.
And do you think that selection is more something that comes from the nature of the technology, as you were saying, or from the nature of the person behind it?
I think it's definitely the nature of the technology, I would say.
Okay.
If you start working with the pharmaceutical, let's say, therapies, and you really want to, often the pathway is that there's some kind of an IPO on the way. Of course, you could also build just IP and sell it, but I think often these kind of new technologies, new platforms, I think that the most probable, there's actually a really nice exit pathway when by packaging the technology into something successful and then acquisition. And I see that's why the first option is, I think, it's a very viable strategy for many academic innovations and platform technologies.
In your own experience, the CEO was always a founder, or did you feel like there were times where it was necessary to bring in a professional CEO?
Yeah, my first company, Blueprint Genetics, we co-founded with 3, I would say, risk scientists, and we had no experience in running any startup. So very quickly after founding the company, one of the first things we did, we actually strengthened our team with the 4th person who had actually been doing startup before and had a lot of experience in that sense. So that was probably one of the best moves we did, bringing that kind of an individual into the team, because we had a strong understanding of the science and the technology and even how to sell it. And then we brought the 4th person who had already done one startup in a totally different space, but had that experience of actually running a small startup and especially going through those first critical years when often companies die. So I think we had a really, I would say, the success story was largely based on the fact that we had a great, I would say, the early team was, I would say, so well equipped to actually do what we were planning to do.
But in your more recent ventures, because you've had that experience, you don't feel that need as much as you did before.
No. Of course, that's gone away. But I think when we're doing it the first time, I would say we probably would have done enormously more mistakes if we hadn't actually strengthened our team also with that kind of a startup experience.
And the final question on this segment will be, if you had to select only one, would you take academic advisory on your board or industry commercial advisory?
Industry commercial advisory.
Right.
It's just now, commercializing any technology is just so
it's the hard bit.
It's so hard.
I want to go back on the US investor and European investors. You say you like working with both. I suppose you like different things about them. Can you tell us a bit more about it? What are the key differences maybe you identified when working with both, and what would be your advice with how to work with a US investor versus how to work with an EU investor? The things they want are probably different.
Yeah, that's a complex question, because I haven't really been able to even define in my head that this is a typical European and this is a typical US investors. I've encountered so different types of expertise also on the investor side. So I think my kind of expectations and experiences have vary so much depending on who these investors are. What do they typically invest? What are their like typical expertise areas? Because some investors can be hardcore experts in the field, and some are more generalists. I haven't really been able to identify, I think, kind of a pattern that somehow they are different, European or US investors. I think in a fundraising setting that we had in 2025, I don't know, is there some kind of an atmosphere difference at the moment in 2025, especially in the biotech field, that I think there was maybe a little bit more pessimism and anxiety in US investors in investing in space like Avenue than European. That was maybe the difference that I actually noticed in 2025 when we went to the fundraising. I had somehow a much more optimistic and more, I would say, positive looking atmosphere into this kind of a biotech space than maybe some US investors. Which actually led that these last large 2 rounds have been European VCs that have invested in Avenue Biosciences. And I think US investors that I've talked to have been a little bit more, I would say, even less, I would say, risk-taking in the last 1 year. But this is just my own experience, my own gut feeling about it. I don't have any numerical data around it, but that was my gut feeling when talking with investors in both continent.
It's a good experience. Would you be able to, did you ask them maybe about it? Is this something that you'd be able to explain? Is it because the US maybe led more investment earlier than Europe in this field, kind of saw what worked, what didn't work, whereas Europe is maybe less mature in that field, and so they're less risk averse, and maybe they will be more risk averse in the future? Is there kind of a dynamic that you could use to actually explain this change in the vibe?
I probably don't have a right answer to that, or at least the ultimate correct answer. But as I said, this is based on a certain gut feeling. I talked to a lot of US investors. I explained the technology that we're doing. It's a very hot area, like proteomics overall. But there's a lot of I would say, controversial therapies like mRNA therapies and vaccines that have got a hit here in the United States because of certain political movements. So I think I don't know if it's the certain political situations or the financial situations in the world, or there's, of course, this rising biotechnology world in Asia that is causing also some, I would say, maybe some trouble in some investment circles. That where are they? What is happening into these biotech ecosystems in US as China, and those are growing very rapidly.
Gotcha.
I think I had a feeling that US investors, at least some of the people I've been talking to, were slightly more paralyzed investing in this space compared to the European investors. There was maybe a certain, I would say, more optimism and positive thinking about the future and technologies like ours. But this is like just based on my kind of
is your gut feeling
based on the interactions I felt that there was more, I would say, paralyzed VCs in US, especially in this space, or at least people who are really avoiding risk, and there was I would say maybe this kind of a nuclear cold winter in biotech investing was still, I would say, in place in US, especially in 2025.
I see. Speaking of those investor relations, I asked you about whether you wanted, when they're in a pitch, you were putting more the science first or the markets first. And you said, well, we're putting the market in front. So then we're leaving the science, we're going to the market bit. Why did you lead with the market? Is it because, well, you're just conscious that a VC has to make financial returns? Or is it, and that's, I'm actually teasing one of the questions I'm going to ask later, but is it because science can scare an investor if you're going too much in the technical details? It can scare them off. So you want to talk the things they know. You want to talk about the numbers, the money.
Yeah, I think academic innovation, things that I really want to see if I would qualify a technology that this can actually make a rational spin out, is of course that the science has to be solid. It has to be done in a right manner. The data has to be like really well done. The evidence has to be on the table that I would say, okay, this technology has now all the elements to actually that it could really become a commercial product.
Gotcha.
I think that's one of the first things. And of course, at that point, if we spin out that company, you already have a certain level of scientific evidence to actually justify a certain kind of a vision that you're working on. But I think that the distance from that vision to real product and integrating into some biopharma process or some other workflow in the hospital or healthcare systems, it's a massive leap. And in that sense, the analyzing the markets and understanding the market, understanding the go-to-market strategy, the pricing strategy, who is paying, and how do you integrate it into some workflows. It is, I would say, it's an enormous, I would say, to climb. And I think that has to be really well done already when you go to your first investor meetings. That's where often people fail. And I think that's the riskiest thing, is how do you really back cool science? The science is not often the problem. How do you actually get that science to a successful product, and it fits into these different ecosystems and workflows? That is just, it's a very difficult and I would say challenging process. And that's why I put so much effort actually on the market. What is the market? Who's the buyer? Who's going to be paying for it? And can the technology really survive the test of that commercialization? It's so crucial. That's why I'm basically focusing really on the market. Even in the founding team, like that kind of a commercial experience. But it's just we can read the science is already good. We know, of course, there's a lot of R&D often that has to happen, but that's something that we can tackle. But it's still the leap into a commercial successful product is so massive, and that's something that you have to really focus from very early.
It can sound a bit counterintuitive that because it's very deep in the science, you'd put more effort showing on the science, but actually it's the opposite. Because it's deep on the science, so you've got that locked in, time to actually show that, yes, we can execute on the rest. Right.
Yeah, and of course, you need of course the team to do all the work with the science and technology in the company, and that's also challenging. I'm not saying that, but it's something that often we can bring the expertise and we know how to do. But it's really how do we make that a product? That's often one of the biggest challenges for these kind of startups.
Right. So now we've done the this that. Let's switch into a very similar principle, even simpler or not. Very same. Quick questions, you answer yes or no, then we discuss about it. Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. So this one is a bit of a follow-up what we just discussed. Have you ever felt like the depth of your science made investors more nervous rather than confident?
Yes.
Did you regret anything about the timing of your exit with Blueprint?
No.
Have you ever taken more money from an investor that you later wish you hadn't?
No.
Did your pitch deck significantly change between your first round at Blueprint and the Avenue seed, the latest round at Avenue?
No. I would say there's certain certain principles and laws of nature, which I think are part of successful fundraising when it comes to pitch decks. I don't think those philosophies have changed.
Gotcha. Did you ever seriously consider staying in academic research than going into startups?
Yes, before I went to the startup, that was my career plan.
But it never came back
No,
to you?
never came back. Never
Okay.
came back in a way. This entrepreneurship and working in this kind of space has really, I really got fascinated about it. So I've never really thought about going back.
Would you say that your experience as a physician actually helped you close some investments?
No,
And finally, are you having a good time on the show?
I'm really having good time here. So very nice talking about this.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So let's discuss some of these. Have you felt like the depth of your science actually made an investor more nervous than confident? You said yes after somewhat of a reflection. Can you tell us about that time where an investor maybe was too scared that the science was getting too complex and it kind of closed them a little bit? What was going on there?
Yeah, explaining these kind of new technologies and the scientific background for, I would say, general deep tech venture capital investors, or I would say many investors, is challenging. And I think that's something that I would say academic researchers, including myself, I think even if you go, it's often that we become blind. How do we present our science and data? So it's
You think some things are trivial when they're not?
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that's I try to kind of I actually I use this sometimes as an advice for some other academic innovators, that you have to think about that your audience is like, let's say, high school students, like people who already they know some kind of biological concepts and and stuff like that. But that's the level of, I would say, the audience has to be that a high school student has to have a full understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So you have to kind of try to simplify everything. And I think that's you can easily overwhelm any investor. And that can also happen in a scientific conference. Let's say you're just trying to present your data into an academic audience. The audience is like, most of them are maybe not working in your niche. And I think that's something which I'm horrified in my conference, and people are giving their presentation. I'm like, I don't know, probably 75% of the people are not following because it's just too complex. I think it's selling your science is something that I really learned at Stanford University. So my principal investigator was really heavily focused on this. How do we present our data so that it's understandable? And she also, my principal investigator, Marlin Rabinovich, I think she always told that the presentation has to be really focused on a person that doesn't understand anything about your work. And you have to be able to explain your data. And that has really helped me, I think, in also packaging the science into investors, science into potential buyers. So you have to be really, that's something that you have to focus. And I've also found myself bringing the science in a wrong way. I can see the investors that they are, they don't get it. And that's, of course, things are not going to go very well if there's like any kind of questions that they don't understand the technology. So that's something that I tend to, because I tend to work with some founders come to me and show their investor decks, and then I read it and it's like, wow, this is way too complicated. The investor will understand your story. So it's something that's a skill set. You learn how to really simplify this complex biology and science.
You're offering me here a perfect transition to the part 3 of this episode. We're reaching the 1 hour mark very soon, and it's been an amazing conversation, and we can finally tackle fundraising in a bit more depth. You've done it for a couple of different companies at a couple of different stages as well. So one of the questions I could have had in there actually was, which one was the fundraiser you preferred doing and the one that you hated the most doing? And actually, let's start with this. Is there one of the fundraisers that you've been through that was your preferred one? Because I don't know, the people you met along the way or the learnings you got along the way were the most interesting and it was the most fulfilling? And what was the one that you absolutely hated because, I don't know, the lawyers in writing the terms were a pain to deal with, the investors weren't really understanding the dynamics, the university was getting in your way or something? Tell us more about the bad stories and the happy stories so that maybe we can learn together about the things to do, things not to do, and some things you would do different if you had to do it all over again.
Yeah. I think fundraising itself has always, it requires a massive amount of work, and it can become quite painful. It's not necessarily because it's some kind of the VCs are difficult or something. It's just finding the right, I would say, entity to fund your company. It's a long process. It's a long, tedious process where you probably have to. There's a lot of self-reflection included. You're trying to get the feedback why these investors are not investing in you, and then you're kind of wondering like how do you can we actually modify the story? Can we actually change the projections of the company so that they actually would attract the current, I would say, investor world? So of course it's a tedious project, and I think there's some scars left after every investment round. I can't really name any kind of a horror story. I don't think any of them have been really any horror story. They've been always a long process where you have to, I think especially in the last few years, I think investors have really done longer due diligences and they use more steps in evaluating you. So I've never really had that kind of an experience where somehow the fundraising happens very easily. And it's always a long process. I can't really say that I have like much learnings of some kind of a horror story.
Okay.
Or if there has been some horror story, I don't think I want to even publicly talk about them. So, but like I said, it's in many fundraising situations there are always some hiccups or some situations. But I think in most cases, the venture capital and the investors I've been working, they've been great people.
Okay.
Great companies.
So it comes down to the person
VC.
in the end.
I think I've really always enjoyed all the venture capital people that I've been working and good relationship with them. It's not the VCs. It's sometimes some other previous investors, or not previous investors, but some equity holders that there might be some frictions. But like I said, that is also very rare. I've not really much experienced that. I don't really have a horror story, I would say. I think it's always a very tedious process, and I think that's something that founders have to think, that when you go into fundraising, it's actually a major R&D effort, because you're actually there validating your technology, market strategy, everything is going to get validated by investors and also experts that they bring on the table. So it's a huge opportunity to actually further develop your vision and the company. And that is something that I think has been a crucial thing in every successful fundraising, is that we have to be able to be agile and pivot and maybe make some modifications into our plans and get the learnings out of that process.
I like this. I'm actually going to write it down right now because I think that will make for an amazing, usually I don't do this during the episode. I have a little notepad or I write this on the side to keep specific quotes for the podcast when we publish. I like to have a little quote every time. It makes for a nice hook. I think what I said was really nice is that fundraising is actually a massive R&D step.
Yeah, I would consider it in a way. Yeah, it's an R&D.
It's not something that I've heard before, but the way you put it, it's exactly that. Is a hypothesis that you need that amount of money and you're going to sell it this way to those guys. And you test your hypothesis, and if it doesn't work, you iterate and you learn. Yeah. Sometimes you don't get the feedback. You were mentioning this earlier, that some of the VCs just reject you and they never tell you why, or they give you some bullshit reason, like, oh, you're too early, which sometimes you are too early, but 90% of the time it's not just too early. There is more to it, but they don't necessarily have the time to explain it also. How is it that you were taking those feedback when there was not enough feedback? What was your way of doing the R&D? How were you iterating on, you reach out to someone, it doesn't work. Okay, what are the learnings? How do we process that? Well, did you develop any methods? How are you taking that in?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, sometimes you get that feedback. You get the clear reasons why you're not interesting to them. And sometimes you just have to almost, again, go into more, I would say, witchcraft. You have a certain gut feeling why this didn't work out. The basic reality is that if you have like perfect investors that typically invest in a similar space and you're constantly getting a no, I think it's one of those steps where you should stop almost fundraising for a little while and start evaluating, like, what are the reasons why this is. And of course, I really try to ask the investors also, what are the weak spots? Why are you not interested in this? So I try to also always suck that information, because I think it's very helpful. And whether it's a business model or there's some kind of scientific questions, there's some kind of concerns, I really want to kind of get those things on the table so that I can maybe iterate our business plan or go-to-market strategy, pricing strategy, kind of. So it's a combination of sometimes having the gut feeling, but it's also trying to really get in those investor discussions also the feedback on why this is not interesting. And sometimes you don't get that feedback. There are situations they don't give you, or they might give you some bullshit answer. That's also happened. I do notice that. But getting a constant no from investors that should invest is a big red flag for you, because then you have to kind of see, why is this not resonating in those investors that you would think that invests in this kind of a space. And that is something that you have to kind of be able to rapidly modify things and then test again with the next investor. So in that sense, it's a fascinating process to improve your whole story around the technology.
Has it ever happened that at some point you had maybe one question where you were thinking, okay, we have this hypothesis why it's not going well, and you call an investor, not really because you think they're going to give you money, but just to have someone to bounce those questions to, and just reach out to someone with the whole purpose of the call being to test one hypothesis like this, for example? Has it ever happened?
I don't think I've ever had that kind of a call with an investor. Like that was the ultimate goal here. I may have that
Right.
kind of calls with some industry experts or people
Mhm.
who are potential maybe future customers. I may have those kind of validation steps where I go and tell, hey, we're thinking of founding this company. Like with Avenue Biosciences, I had some interactions with these kind of industry people in the very early stage, just to also kind of validate my own thinking. And so those were, of course, very helpful. They were helpful to, I would say, stimulate further motivation to actually proceed with the setting up the company.
What would you say to founders that are scared of doing this? So many times, as a mentor myself, I remember something like a month ago, I had the lucky opportunity to give a lecture in the first stages of fundraising, so raising your first round, doing your first deck, etc., at the International University of Monaco. And there were a lot of really project-hungry students that wanted to create something. And I was saying, okay, just tell me about your idea. Let's bounce back a couple of ideas. And a lot of them were, oh, I don't know if I can tell you, or let's sign an NDA, or I don't really want to share it. And they're scared that their idea is going to get stolen. And here you said, well, you're taking your idea and just going to the industry to validate something. Were you not scared? And if not, plain why? Because I think a lot of people out there don't get the amount of support they could get because they play with the cards too close to their chest. And so no one can see what's on the card. So I'm not saying just give your IP away, but there is always a sort of balance of not saying too much, but also not keeping it all to yourself. And that's a big message to the potential first-time founders who are scared of doing that.
Yeah, I think of course, with the Avenue, the technology had already been validated. We had the results. There was patent applications ongoing. There's IP setting. So, and of course, when I go to talk with industry individuals or share some decks, I think it has to be in a way something that is non-confidential. In this case, for us, the patent were already so far, so anybody can go and read the patents. So it's technically publicly available information already. So I have to say that the individuals that I'm going to talk with, I'm not so scared.
Gotcha.
I never had any thought that just sharing our vision would somehow be, there would be a risk. I think the benefits from that discussion are overweight, or they overrule significantly the potential risks. So, but I understand maybe with some ideas and some innovative thinkings, there might be scenarios that you don't actually want to even talk about it because it might be so simple and straightforward kind of a solution that you don't want to share that idea with anybody before you're kind of maybe further. But I think with these kind of technologies that I've been working with, I have no problems in going to talk to industry experts.
So the key things to consider before you're thinking, hey, can I talk to someone? And if I talk to someone, what do I tell them? Is calibrating whether there's actually a risk that they can steal it from you. If it's such a high technical invention like what you were doing, the resources needed to recreate it are so big that, hey, you have a bit of margin in front of you. Then there is whether it's public knowledge or not, if it's protected or not. So the timing has to do. And then there's also the relationship, as you were saying. If you know the person well, maybe you approach and you create a network in the ecosystem to the extent that eventually you can tell them about it. And the last one is, well, very simply, just assessing and I think that's a step that we eventually took in our company, and I advise other companies to do it as well, just to write down what is it that you can say about the company and what is it that you don't want to say about the company, and validate this internally, make sure everyone's happy with it. And like, okay, this is a narrative to people we talk to, and this is the narrative for people we get the NDA with, and this is the narrative for later on or due diligence, and this is what we don't tell anyone. Really doing that work early on of separating what goes where is a very important step to take. Maybe a very final note, so I free you as well. I know it's the end of the day for both of us. A bit on the regulation aspect, because you worked in in an environment, and still are with Avenue, that is very heavily regulated. How do you approach fundraising when you have, an investor has risk return profile and they think, if I invest in company X, I want them to be able to give me my money back in 5, 7, 10 years, depends. So if some of these years are already taken and hard blocked by a regulatory endeavor, like, hey, we need 3 years to get the technology to the market, suddenly the investor profiles you address might not be the same, or they might not want to invest because, it's too early. Wait until you get the regulation done, and then you come back to us. Can you tell us maybe a couple of your learnings when it comes to this, when it comes to regulation, timeline, and the fundraising aspect?
Yes. So I have had the privilege now working in 3 different startup scenarios, and 2 of them are, I would say, in regulated environments. So the first one was in the field of diagnostics. So there are a lot of certain, I would say, regulatory requirements and certifications, and which you have to, of course, get and then sustain. And when you're working in international markets, you may have to have several certifications. So that was my first, I would say, regulated environment. It's maybe a little bit less, I would say, it is a less difficult regulated environment than bringing maybe therapies or medical devices, which require FDA level regulation. So of course, the second company was the cardio single that I've been kind of working on with, and there basically we're talking about a new medical device technology that doesn't even have a predicate device. So we're really looking at the de novo approach. So of course, it's a very, I would say, maybe the ultimate regulatory, I would say, restrictions. And so definitely you are looking for a certain subset of investors who know that space. There is you basically, if you're in that kind of a regulated environment, you know that there's a long list of investors that will never invest in you because they don't really go. That's not their kind of specialty. So of course,
There's
this
no
has a huge
K routes that you can pull out of thin air and fast track.
And Avenue Biosciences is a fascinating company in that sense because we work in a so-called pre-regulated world. So this is technology is used in, I would say, early stage development, kind of in a research setting before it enters the clinical development. So we don't really have that kind of a regulatory hurdles. So that's why we've been able to commercially launch this technology very early and find these pharma and biotech partners that want to start working on these protein engineering projects. So I think it's actually quite nice to be in this environment where the regulatory side is not something that haunts you every day.
Can you maybe remind? There's something that I should have asked maybe a bit earlier in the recording. Just very briefly for the audience, we've been talking about all of those companies you have now, Avenue being the more recent one. Just in a couple of words, what is the product? What is the kind of industry you're looking after? And maybe as a closer for the episode, if there are any type of people you want to get in touch with, if there's anyone in the audience that could listen and think, oh, hey, Avenue sounds like something up my avenue, pun intended, and I want to work with these guys. You recently raised a round of funding, so congrats on this, and looking forward to the next thing. So yeah, maybe as a closer word, explain a little bit what you're doing, where you're heading, and if there's anyone you want to get in touch with, be it investment, market, if you're hiring specific profiles. Now the floor is yours. You ask.
All right. Just a few words. Yeah, Avenue Biosciences is a protein engineering company. We have a first of its kind technology that enables us to re-engineer therapeutic use proteins in a way that they actually get secreted much more efficiently from the cell. So it's really enhancing manufacturability, developability of these molecules, as this is an area which is largely underutilized now by current biotech industry. So we re-engineer so-called single sequences of secreted proteins. We are the only company in the world who is offering a high throughput technology, which is a unique combination of wet lab engineering and machine learning. And this technology has now proven with several molecules and modalities to be a very powerful tool to enhance the manufacturing of these molecules and expression. So wide use cases from gene therapies to cell therapies and recombinant protein therapies. And of course, this is a market that is rapidly growing with all the AI innovation. So proteomics and protein-based therapeutic applications is a very exciting area to be. And I think we have a unique technology to really enhance this field, which is now developing more and more complex molecules. And the more the complex the molecules, the worse secretion they have, and we have a tool to help that industry. So that's really what we are doing. We just raised our seed funding round. We're really scaling up our laboratory technology so that we can work with more and more cases. We're also ramping up our commercial operations. I think the next close future hires will be very likely people who are experts in, I would say, commercial side. So probably bringing more hands into our commercial team to help us grow this business. But of course, I would say very likely in the next 18 months, we're also looking for people to strengthen our laboratory and also probably our data science team.
So what kind of target customers are you looking to get in specific industries? You say you have a wide variety of applications. What are the kind of profiles that say if someone knows, oh, I know someone who works in this company or in this type of company, you want to have an introduction to that?
Yeah, I think any company who is now working on biologics, developing biologics, which are kind of, I would say, protein biologics, whether it's antibodies, multi-specific antibodies, fusion proteins, cytokines, hormones, enzymes, or you're working with a cell therapy application where you have you're trying to get your cells to express some unique chimeric receptors or cytokines, mRNA therapies, gene therapies. These are all applications where our platform can be a very powerful tool to enhance the expression of your target protein and get the biological response that you're looking for. So it's we're really looking for, I would say, pharmaceutical developers, either big pharma, small pharma, and we're always excited on expanding this technology into some new areas. So co-development, those kind of projects are also something that we're always looking for.
Beautiful. I think that's going to be the closing remarks. We know what you need. We'll do, of course, we'll do our best. I'm always trying to connect people together. By the way, at some point, does it involve, are you working directly on the existing proteins, or are you also doing like DNA sequencing or DNA synthesis? Do you have any requirements for doing this kind of work in-house?
We basically partner with companies who do DNA synthesis and stuff like so. We have, of course, partners and collaborators where we have outsourced some of the development side. But otherwise, we do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to the engineering and finding these unique molecules in our house.
There's an introduction I will do for you then. Someone who actually is a good friend of mine. I went through the Zinc program together, and they work in a DNA 3D printing company called AmpliSynth. They just recently got their funding. They're working towards their next funding, and I think it's a very, very exciting field. So definitely a good connection to make. On that note, Tero, thank you so much for all those learnings. It's really nice to talk about certain things that might scare people. I think the whole academia, IP, the hard discussions to have at the start of a company, it's important that we get those things out and that we don't just talk about, hey, it's important to have a big tam-sam-sam or a big market and GTM strategy. Some things are harder to discuss and is the hard pill to swallow, but it needs to be done. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. So the 3 experiences even on that topic. I don't know, do you have any very last word to close the episode? Any last remark?
No, it has been a pleasure meeting you and having this discussion. So this is a discussion very close to my heart. So happy to be here today and having this chat.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Then in that case, for the audience, you will find everything on all of our socials. Please do also check out Avenue Bioscience. Check out Tero-Pekka and his team. If you're working in this field, look in this direction as well. And you will find all of the learnings on our website. We'll have the repository with everything we talked about today. I'm thinking mainly building the team, things to be aware of when you are doing a spin-off from a university, how to do your fundraising, regulatory space, and all of that stuff. Find that in our socials, and we will hear you in the next one. Thank you so much, Tero.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.